In this episode, what we are going to learn is how to handle inputs from a controller. I have an Xbox controller, so I'm just going to use this one, but probably this should also work with other types of controllers, for example, a PlayStation controller and so on. So let's get started. First, go to the Arcade's API reference, click here, again API reference, and here you will find the game controller. Let's open this up, and here, as you can see, you can call the arcade.getControllers, which will return all the connected controllers. And this under the hood calls the Pyglet.input.getControllers. And if you want to know more about how to handle controller input, you should go from Arcade to Pyglet documentation, and here is the link to the docs. So let's open this up. And here is the control managers class. We are going to use this, and here you will find that there are several methods, like the onConnect when you connect the controller, onDisconnect when you disconnect a controller, and so on. So let me scroll up, and here is the using controllers in Pyglet. So you can get all the controllers with this input in Pyglet, but we have the Arcade's equivalent of this. And here are the possible inputs, like the left X, left Y, right X, right Y, left trigger, right trigger, and so on. The A button, B button, X button, Y button, and so on. And here are the methods. So on stick motion, we are going to use this one. Here is the on trigger motion, on D-pad motion, on button press, on button release. So let's see an example of using an Xbox controller in Arcade. So I have already created a starter scene. We have a circle X and circle Y properties, and here in the onDraw, I'm just going to draw a circle in the circle X and Y position, and this will be a 80 by 80, so width and height, and its color is red. Okay, also have added this onUpdate method, because we will need it for moving the circle. And now let's do the controller stuff. You can do it actually two ways. I'm just going to show you one way. So by instantiating an Arcade control manager, so manager equals arcade.controlManager, and here just call the getControllers. So controllers equals manager.getControllers. And if you have multiple controllers connected to your computer, it will return a list of those controllers. But if you have only one, like me, it will return a list of that one controller. So let me run it. So print controllers, and here, as you can see, it is a list of X input controller name X input 0. And actually there is a second way to do this, which is just a one-liner. You can do this like this. Controllers equals arcade.getControllers. So I'm just going to comment this out, but this returns also the same as this line. Okay, now let's check if there is a controller. So if this list is not empty, so if there are a controller connected, so then we are going to save to this Xbox controller. And if you are using a PlayStation controller, you should name it PlayStation controller. So from the controllers list, the first index or the 0th index. And we should also open this controller using this command. So Xbox controller.open. And I'm just also going to add an else clause if there is no controller, because the game relies on a controller being present. So else, if there is no controller, I'm just going to raise an exception and quit the program. So raise exception, no controller found. Okay, now let's add a method to actually check for the controller event. So this will be the onStick motion. So define on_stick_motion, and this takes as its first argument a controller, the controllers or the input name, and also a vector. And this should be a static method, so we shouldn't have adding here the self, because this accepts only 3 parameters. So let's delete this self and firstly add a decorator to it. So Xbox controller.event, and add one more decorator to it to make it a static method. So like this. You can also just move this on-stick motion outside of this class, for example here on line 18. Later I'm just going to do this, but if you want to add it to the GameU class, you should add this static method decorator also. And this at Xbox controller event will actually add this input event from the controller to the Pyglet event loop. So that's why this decorator is needed. Let's print out something. For example, the name of the input. Okay, I'm just going to run this. And as you can see, it prints out left stick and right stick. So if I move the right stick, it prints out right stick, right stick. If I move with the left stick, it prints out left stick. So this function only detects the sticks, left and the right stick. And let's print out also the vector. So print vector, and as I move with the right stick, it creates this vector too, so X and Y. So, and we are going to use this vector too to actually move that red circle. But first, I'm just going to add here a pass and show you one more controller method, which is the onButtonPress. So on_button_press, it also needs the controller and a button name. And here I'm just going to print out something, but first check if button name equals A, I'm just going to print fire. So let's say the A button is the fire button, or if button name equals B, I'm just going to print dodge. So for example, the B will be the dodge button. And this also needs these two decorators. So the Xbox controller event and the static method. And now let's run it. And here in the console, if I press the A button, it will print fire. If I press the B button, it prints dodge. And as I already showed you in the beginning of this video, you have to check out Pyglet's documentation for all these methods for controllers. Okay, so now let's move that red circle using this on-stick motion. For this, I'm just going to create two global or module level variables. One will be the directions, and this will be a dictionary, so it will have a left, right, up and down, and all of these will be set to false, so booleans. And I'm going to also create a speed variable which will be set to 300. And here in the on-stick motion, I'm just going to check if we are moving with the right stick. So if name equals right stick, then I'm just going to also check the vector. So I have already printed these out. So if vector.x, so this vector, its x property is less than 0, I'm just going to set the directions at left to true. If the vector x is greater than 0, I'm just going to change the directions at right also to true. So now we will be able to move the circle left and right. But for the movement, we are going to use the onUpdate function. And here in the onUpdate function, I'm just going to create a position vector. So circle position equals arcade.mat.vector2 and giving it the circle x and circle y. And if the directions at left is set to true, I'm just going to change the circle's position vector. So in this case, circle position will be equal to or minus equal to arcade.mat.vector2, giving it the speed. So we are moving on the x, and the y we are setting to 0. And also I'm just going to multiply this by the delta time. And now let's do this also for the right. If the directions at key right is true, then we are going to add to circle position, and remember this is a vector 2. Also a new vector, so arcade.mat.vector2, speed 0 times delta time. We are modified this vector here, this circle position, and to the self.circlex and self.circley we are going to set it to circle position, and this will actually extract the xy value. So the x will go to this and the y will go to this property. And now, if everything is okay, I will be able to move the circle. Okay, but there is one more problem. So here we are setting both. So I have moved the stick to also to left, also to right. So these now both are true, and they are cancelling out each other's movement. So I'm just also going to add one more if condition here in the on stick motion under this if name equals right stick condition. So if the absolute value of vector x is less than 0.1, then I'm going to set back the directions right and the directions left to false. Okay, now let's check it. Okay, now it moves right, it moves left with the right stick. Now let's add also an up and down movement. So for the up and down, we are going to do almost the same as we did here, but here we are going to ask for the vector y. So if vector dot y is greater than 0, directions up will be set to true. If vector y is less than 0, the directions down will be set to true. We should also reset these. So if the absolute value of vector y is less than 0.1, we are resetting the directions at up and down to false. And now let's add the movement here in the onUpdate. So I'm going to add two more if conditions. So if directions up is true, the circle position plus equals arcade.mat.vector2, and in this case we are changing the y. So x 0 and the y will be set to speed, so 300 times the delta time. And the same applies if directions down is true. Here we are subtracting, so minus equals arcade.mat.vector2, x is set to 0 and the speed times the delta time. And now, if everything went okay, I will be able to move the circle in all directions. So up, down, and it also of course moves diagonally in all directions. And one more information, probably these controller events shouldn't go inside the GameView class, as I already told you in the beginning of this video. So I'm just going to, if you want to add these to the GameView, you can do this like this, I just showed you, but I'm just going to refactor a code a little bit and move these functions outside. So I'm just going to Ctrl X, cut this out, outside of this GameView class, for example here. And in this case, of course, we don't need the static method decorator anymore. We only need the Xbox controller event decorator. And also move this function or method outside and remove the static method decorator and only leave the Xbox controller event decorator. So here everything stays the same. Here also everything stays the same. So I just move these two controller events outside of the game view. And let me try it. So the circle still moves. Left, right, up, down, and the buttons A prints fire and the B prints dodge. And the very last thing I just wanted to show you in this episode is here in the on-stick motion function. So why I'm doing this if absolute value of vector x is less than 0.1 and also if absolute value of vector y is less than 0.1. So here I'm just going to print out this vector to show you the values, and as you can see, without moving the stick, it prints out x is 0.04 and here also 0.04, here it is 0.01, the y is 0.02. So without moving the stick, it has these very small values, which are usually smaller than 0.1. So if I move the stick, of course this will be either -1 if I move it to left, or positive 1 on the x if I move it to the right, or 0.99, and of course between 0 and 1 on the y-axis, or 0 and negative 1 on the y-axis if I move down the stick. So I want to filter out all these very small values. Now I'm not touching the stick, but as you can see, it still has these small values. So I just want to filter out these very small values. That's why I'm using here this absolute value of vector.x is less than 0.1, then set back the directions right and left to false, and if absolute value of the vector.y is less than 0.1, then set the directions at up and down also to false.